you got started before I could get videoed, but basically what we're doing here is this is the log splitter that we made for the back of the M62. So it has the backhoe mount on it. So it had that cylinder on there. This is the one where we bent this end. The I-beam just wasn't big enough, strong enough for the cylinder we had. So basically what we're going to do is cut that off here. And he's already got this flipped around to where we'll make a mount and put a smaller cylinder on, and then it will mount onto a flat plate, and instead of being a horizontal splitter, it will be a vertical splitter that will run off the hydraulics and everything from our current splitter. So we'll get some hydraulic hoses, some quick connects to hook up to all that. And we have a small cylinder that we're not using that will get connected to this. So basically have a 1-inch hole here that we need to drill out, which with the way we welded this, it's not going to be easy to do, so we're going to go ahead and torch that, and then we have a bushing that we can weld in that's that perfect 1-inch hole, so we can get that side of the cylinder attached. And then we'll have to make the inverse of this side. So the cylinder has 2 ends like you see on a 3-point hitch on it. So instead of having the forks that go like this that the other cylinder had, it has just another thing that it needs to go through. So we'll have to make a similar thing to this where it has pieces on both sides that we then mount to. So basically we'll flip everything around and kind of make everything in reverse. We saved that other cylinder. We're going to make up, we'll save this backhoe mount, we'll cut it off and leave it on that plate, and we'll get it so that we can mount it. We'll make up a bigger I-beam piece that won't bend, and then we'll make up another cutting wedge to use for the backhoe mount. So we'll be working on that. Like I said, he got started before I could get video of all of it, but we'll get that torched out tonight and hopefully get that welded back in. So we have one side done, and then we can start working on the other side to get it so that it matches. Okay, another change of plan. So this here is bigger than what we have here. So we have a scrap of what we used to make this out of. We're gonna cut it so we have a square, cut it in half, and then weld it onto the back piece here to extend that out so we can get a hole in it. So here we're drilling out holes for that new addition. I will say ahead of time here that we go through a couple different iterations, and everything I say kind of moving forward isn't exactly how it ends up. Kind of changed my mind a couple different times, partly just from a usability standpoint, but then also from a kind of what we end up using cylinder wise in this case. So we were going to use that cylinder, ends up it only has like a 13-inch stroke, so it wasn't going to be enough. Okay, so what we ended up doing instead was we're going to extend that back plate on the wedge. We just took these two pieces, so they'll go on the opposing sides, and we went ahead and welded them together so we could drill this 1-inch hole. So we have that perfect 1-inch hole now. So we won't need the bushing now to weld in, but we'll get these welded on with like this in place so that it stays lined up, and then get it all welded up so that there's now room for that cylinder head to go in there. So with all that said, that was the plan at the time. I ended up ordering a cylinder and using a different one, so we ended up cutting that off in the future. But here we're getting a plate welded on the bottom, which is where the end of the cylinder used to mount. So we're going to plate on here, so that basically when we split wood, you're pushing against that plate in the other end of the I-beam and not against some table that we've made. So we get this welded on because we know that it's going to be a solid piece. We do go ahead and get those other pieces welded on because the cylinder at the time we thought we were going to use was, like I mentioned before, was going to have to slide in a little bit further. And didn't fit, so we could have kept them on with the cylinder that I ended up buying, but it did have a different end on it, and figured that anything we could have that would be closer to the actual wedge itself, we figured it'd be better. So like I said, we'll go through a couple different iterations here as we work on it, but this bottom here doesn't change. Go ahead and get it welded up all the way so that we have a good sturdy base that will essentially be what you push against. Here we're messing with that cylinder and kind of looking up, so just from the size of the cylinder it looked like it was a 16-inch stroke cylinder, but whenever you actually pull it out, just how this one's designed, there wasn't that much. It was only about 13, which just really wasn't going to be enough for a log splitter. So this is the extension, so that other cylinder will go in, pin. And then this is the pusher plate, so this is what your wood will be pushing against, so we left that in there, which is for the other one. So just put some weld here, we'll tip it over, we'll get a solid bead there. And we're going to put a piece of flat steel on top, just tack it on, so that as you weld these outside edges, that's going to want to bend out. So put a piece in so that it will keep it from just bowing out as you weld, which will then obviously get the pin so that it won't move. So I'm going to put that on real quick. So most of this ends up being time lapse, or a lot of it does, just because there's a lot of welding and kind of going through, so it's not necessarily super exciting. I'm just sitting watching that, so I try to kind of keep things moving along here. This does end up being at least a two-parter, but there I worked on getting the bracket for the backhoe cut off. So I just used a grinder with a cutting wheel on it, got that cut off, and then started cleaning up the top and everything. So that we saved, left it on the plate so that basically we could just weld that on something else in the future. I have scoped out some other I-beams. Okay, I had a couple design changes on the log splitter that we're making. So originally had a cylinder that we thought we were going to use. It was left over from something else. Come to find out, even though it looked like it was a 16-inch cylinder, the stroke on it was only about 13 inches. So there's going to leave too much of a dead space at the end of the splitter to where you're going to have like a 5-inch gap or more, and just wasn't going to really be practical for that. So ended up buying a cylinder. This is a 3 by 16, I believe is what we ended up getting. Has fixed pins on each side here to hook up to, and then has a 16-inch stroke and should work a little bit better. So because of how this one's configured, we ended up changing the log splitter a little bit from what we had welded on the other day, so I'll show you that next. Okay, so looking at the log splitter here, the splitting wedge, so we had welded on a piece here to extend that out so that that other cylinder would fit in there. Well, now with this cylinder, we're going to go back to the hole we put in. I'm going to use this bushing in here, so basically it'll go in this hole. It will just go, so we have to tap it in, but it will go in there, so we'll weld these in with the cylinder in place so that everything's straight. So we wanted to shorten this all up a little bit, plus the thing that we welded on, because the thing that we welded before, or the cylinder we had before, it had the rotating pieces in like you would see on a like 3-point hitch where it can move a little bit, so it didn't have to be perfectly straight. Well, it was off just a little bit, so when we put the new cylinder on, it's fixed, so it was off to one side whenever it was lined up. So we'll get everything, we'll get these put in, have the cylinder attached, so that we make sure everything's straight. We also want to shorten everything up a little bit, just because this end is the side that's bent from whenever we were using it on the backhoe. So if we can get kind of this way a little bit away from that bend, it will help whenever we attach things. We won't have that to contest with. I think where we put it will be just this side of that bend. We're going to go ahead and leave that on there just because it's a good spot to attach back to, so that, you know, whenever you're splitting a log and you come across a hard spot, you're obviously going to be putting force back that way against that. So it'll create some bracing onto that piece of angle iron sticking down, or that I-beam sticking down, to take some of that you know, force. And with this, you know, it's going to be a much smaller cylinder and a much smaller pump, whereas, you know, with the big cylinder we had on there, and then using this machine and the pressure and everything that it has and the capability it has, it was just bending that. So with the smaller one, I don't foresee that being an issue. So then the other thing we did do was put this bottom plate on, so we have that, so then we'll get a big piece of flat steel to put on here as like a table. So everything will be inverted up, so that this will be the bottom, and then that will be sticking kind of up, and then have this piece here and be about you know, waist height, so you're working at a nice height. And then we'll have to build legs and everything for that table that goes down. So a little bit of a plan change on that. So we'll get these bushings welded in and get that cylinder put in. So once we have that, we'll be able to get the geometry of what will be required on where to put the other end of the cylinder down here. So we already have the pieces drilled for that, and kind of an idea of how to attach it. We just have a little bit of welding to do to get it tacked on, and then kind of make sure that everything will run back and forth before affixing everything permanently. And then once we're happy that everything will work as it should, then we'll get everything welded up real nice and be able to then kind of start getting this inverted and working on the table piece of it and the legs next. Alright, so I haven't tacked anything together yet, but this is kind of a preliminary idea. So basically we'll get a smaller pin. This is just to go all the way through. So these bushings will go in here. So we blew out a hole with the torch, and then the bushing goes in for that 1-inch hole that's in the cylinder. So we put those in and tack these in with everything in place so that you know that everything's lined up. And then same thing here, so we have these pieces, need to get everything lined up and square, but just kind of as an example. So you have these pieces, so it brackets the cylinder piece, pin going through this back piece here. So we'll get everything squared up and get everything kind of tacked together, kind of in place, and then make sure that everything's happy. And then the idea is we'll then take from here, so this will be the fixed point, obviously. This will be the moving piece. So as you're splitting, you're going to have force that's pushing against this, and you know this is pretty tall, and you're just going to have a weld down here and these welded here. So we'll want to take a brace from here back to here, whether it be an angle or straight back. We want to tie into this black piece here. Even though it's bent, it's still going to be pretty strong with all this here. So we'll come back to here and get some bracing in this piece here. Probably do an angle from there back and put a couple pieces in, so that makes that stronger, so that you know, the force that's going on this doesn't just peel this off and actually has something to push against. So kind of the idea, and just kind of getting everything fit here, make sure all the metal kind of goes where it's supposed to, make sure the pins go in, and then I've kind of gone through and gotten everything cleaned up. Go that direction. Got everything cleaned up so that whenever we weld, you don't have that galvanizing on there and then the paint that's on there. So this one's already pretty much cleaned up these bushings just a little bit, took a grinder and got those. So getting close to the point where once we get some of this stuff tacked, we'll want to get some hoses to get this hooked up so we can run that back and forth and just make sure we don't have a bind in anything before you get too crazy attaching everything, so that if there is an issue we can address it up front instead of after everything's welded. So so far just lots of grinding and kind of getting everything fit, but here pretty soon we'll get stuff tacked together and start going from there. So now that we have kind of our two fixed points, we can then start building around that, since the cylinder is going to be the main focal point of that. Alright, so here I got all that welded together, so everything's tacked on there, and he's cutting the pieces now that we're going to use for the angles going back. So that's what I kind of show here, is basically he's cutting that so that we can have pieces that will tie back into that. And here in just a minute I'll show we changed our mind and we ended up cutting this off at the back there, just because that piece all bent, it wasn't very pretty, so we put that in, and then we come up with braces later on to kind of help strengthen all that in a different way, kind of going forward instead of back. So this is essentially the log splitter piece done, and we'll start on the table next. So this will be a two-parter, and so check out part 2 for building the table and getting it all assembled.